Late at night, when the London fog creeps through the quiet streets of Kensington, whispers of a spectral presence stir within the high brick walls of Garden Lodge. Those who have dared to linger outside its black iron gates claim to hear faint echoes of a piano playing soft, melancholic notes drifting through the cold air, as if Freddy himself still composes in the afterlife. Former staff members and visitors have reported chilling encounters. The flicker of candlelight in empty rooms, the rustle of unseen footsteps on the grand staircase, and the inexplicable scent of cigarettes and expensive cologne lingering in the air. Some say they've glimpsed a shadowy figure in the windows, watching from behind the lace curtains, only for the shape to vanish when approached. One chilling account comes from a housekeeper who once tended to the property after Freddy's passing. She recalls waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of a deep, familiar chuckle echoing through the hallways. As she crept toward the music room, she swears she saw the lid of the grand piano slowly closing on its own. The next morning, a single red rose had been placed atop it, just as Freddy used to do after finishing a song. Despite efforts to dismiss the claims as mere superstition, rumors persist. Some believe Freddy, ever the performer, refuses to leave the stage. Others whisper that he remains tethered to the house by a love too great to fade, even beyond death. Would you dare to enter Garden Lodge after midnight? One particularly stormy night, a journalist named Daniel Graves, eager to uncover the truth behind the ghostly rumors, found himself standing before the wrought iron gates of Garden Lodge. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Kensington, rattling the metal bars as if warning him to turn back. But Daniel, armed with a recorder and a restless curiosity, pushed forward. As he stepped through the grand entrance, the air inside the house felt unnaturally heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The dim glow of the antique chandeliers cast elongated shadows along the walls, shifting as though something moved just beyond his sight. He pulled out his recorder and whispered, "If anyone is here, let me know." A long silence, then click. The lights flickered. Daniel's breath hitched as a faint melody drifted through the still air. It was unmistakable. The opening notes of Bohemian Rhapsody, played softly on the grand piano in the music room. His pulse quickened. Swallowing his fear, he followed the sound, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath his every step. As he reached the doorway, the music stopped. The room was empty. The piano lid was closed, but on its polished surface lay a single red rose. Daniel's fingers trembled as he lifted his camera, snapping a picture. But as the flash illuminated the darkened room, he saw something in the reflection of the grand mirror opposite the piano. A figure, a silhouette draped in a flowing robe, standing motionless in the corner. Watching him, the air turned ice-cold. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps as he forced himself to turn, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run. But when he did, the corner was empty. Only the scent of cologne lingered, mingling with the ghostly whisper of laughter that sent shivers down his spine. And then, from somewhere deep within the house, a voice soft, melodic, unmistakable hummed the next line of the song. Daniel wasn't alone, and he was never meant to leave. The air around Daniel thickened, heavy with the weight of something ancient, something that had been waiting for years. His heart hammered in his chest as the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He reached for his recorder, but his fingers fumbled. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the empty corner where the figure had stood. It was as if the house itself was watching him, every inch of it steeped in the memory of a life that had never fully left. Suddenly, the voice returned, more distinct this time. It wasn't humming anymore. It was singing, softly but with an unmistakable authority. "Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?" The words from Bohemian Rhapsody filled the room once again. But this time, they came not from the piano, but from somewhere deeper within the house, echoing from the very walls, as if the house itself was alive with Freddy's energy. His blood ran cold. With slow, deliberate steps, Daniel moved toward the staircase. It was the only way forward, but it felt as if something or someone was pulling him back toward the music room. The closer he got, the stronger the pull, until his legs seemed to be moving of their own accord, dragging him unwillingly toward the dark hallway that led to the upstairs. The temperature dropped even further, and with it, a faint sound echoed from above, a soft thud, like something or someone moving across the floor. The laughter he had heard earlier returned again, but now it was closer, right behind him. Daniel spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the creaking of old wood and the distant hum of the song. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. What was happening? What did Freddy want from him? Taking a deep breath, Daniel made his way up the stairs, each step echoing through the silence like a warning. At the top, the hallway stretched out before him like a dark maze of closed doors. Some were ajar while others were tightly shut, but none of them felt right. There was one room, however, at the far end of the hall, a door he had not seen before. It was strange. He had walked this hallway countless times in the past hour, but this door had never been there. The wood was dark, almost black, with intricate carvings of symbols Daniel couldn't quite decipher. A faint glow emanated from the cracks around the doorframe, casting an eerie light on the floor. The song had stopped. All that was left was a silence that was deafening. Daniel's hand reached toward the doorknob, his pulse pounding in his ears. But just before he could turn it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a room filled with the softest light like moonlight, though there were no windows. Inside was a large mirror, standing tall in the center of the room, surrounded by candles that flickered, casting strange, dancing shadows. But it wasn't the room that made his breath catch, it was the figure in the mirror. Standing in front of it was a man, his back to Daniel, his face hidden in the reflection. A man dressed in black, his silhouette unmistakable. Freddy. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He stepped forward, compelled by a force greater than fear. And as he did, the figure in the mirror slowly turned toward him, revealing eyes that were both familiar and alien. Eyes that seemed to know him, recognize him. The mirror did not reflect his own image, only the figure of Freddy, smiling softly, as if welcoming him into the room. And then, as if time had stopped, Freddy's lips parted only instead of sound. A vision poured out from the mirror, flickering like a broken film reel. A scene unfolded before Daniel's eyes. It was the house, but in the past. He saw Freddy, younger, standing in this very room, laughing and waving to someone who wasn't there anymore. The laughter echoed, but it wasn't the laughter of joy. It was hollow, filled with longing. Daniel couldn't look away. The vision grew darker, the laughter turning into an anguished wail, the figure in the mirror twisting. The room began to feel suffocating, the walls closing in, the lights dimming. The reflection of Freddy's face twisted into a grimace. His eyes locked onto Daniel's, as if pleading for something. Then the door slammed shut behind him. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The room fell into total darkness, plunging Daniel into an eerie silence so complete that it felt as if the house itself had stopped breathing. His heart pounded in his chest as he groped for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic gripped him, and he backed away, his feet stumbling on the uneven floor. He reached for his phone, but it slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground. His fingers scrambled to pick it up, but something stopped him. A cold touch. A chill ran through his body as an icy hand brushed against his shoulder. He whipped around, but there was nothing there, nothing but the oppressive darkness. And then he heard it, the softest whisper, right in his ear. You shouldn't have come. The voice was unmistakable. It was his, Freddy's voice. Daniel froze, his blood turning to ice. The voice was so real, so close. He tried to move, but his legs felt heavy, like they were rooted to the ground. The temperature in the room had dropped to unbearable levels, and his breath formed a mist in front of him. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes on him, and that sensation, the one that made his skin crawl, was growing stronger with every passing second. Slowly, the faint glow returned, but now it came from the mirror once again. This time it was more than just light, it was a pulsating energy, alive with a strange magnetic force. It drew him toward it against his will. His feet dragged across the floor, as if some invisible force was pulling him closer, inch by inch. When he reached the mirror, his reflection was distorted. The face staring back at him wasn't his own, It was the same figure from before, but now he was dressed in black, standing as Freddy had stood all those years ago, his face veiled in shadows. Daniel's breath hitched, his stomach turning as he realized what was happening. He wasn't looking at a reflection anymore. He was looking at himself, the past version of himself, as if the mirror had somehow pulled him into the very essence of the house, trapping him in a loop of time. But it wasn't just his own reflection. No, the figure in the mirror began to move, walking toward him, slow and deliberate. The smile on Freddy's face stretched wider, almost unnaturally so, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling knowledge. "You're too late," Freddy's voice echoed, no longer soft but commanding, reverberating through the room like a thunderclap. The walls of the room trembled as though something ancient was awakening, its power growing stronger by the second. The mirror rippled like water, distorting the scene, and suddenly, Daniel wasn't in the room anymore. He was somewhere else. It was a garden that looked eerily familiar, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The roses, the lilies, the ivy that crawled along the walls, they were all too perfect, too still. The air was thick with an oppressive silence. And then, through the haze of a fog that rolled in from nowhere, a figure appeared. It was Freddy, standing in the center of the garden, his arms outstretched, as if waiting for someone. His eyes gleamed, not with the playful glint that Daniel had come to know from his music, but with an unsettling emptiness. He was waiting for something, or someone. Daniel's pulse raced. He recognized the garden. It was the same one he had seen in photographs, the one where Freddy had once held court with his closest friends, where the world's most famous rock star had found some semblance of peace. But now this place felt wrong. The flowers were withering, and the once vibrant colors had dulled to muted tones of gray. The air tasted of decay. "Freddy," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. The figure turned slowly, as if in slow motion, the air around him crackling. The smile on his lips twisted into something darker, more sinister, as his eyes locked onto Daniel's. "I didn't ask for this," Freddy's voice echoed, low and hollow, as if the words were coming from the very earth beneath them. Daniel's knees went weak, and he collapsed to the ground, unable to tear his eyes away from the figure that was now walking toward him. Each step seemed to shake the ground itself, the flowers wilting as if with every movement, they too were dying. Freddy stopped just in front of him, his face now inches from Daniel's. His eyes weren't the eyes of a man. They were voids, black holes that seemed to suck in all light, all hope. "You've disturbed something that should have stayed buried." Freddy's voice now sounded like a chorus, as if it was coming from all around him, surrounding him, suffocating him. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice lost in the overwhelming presence that surrounded him. Then, as quickly as it had started, the garden began to fade, the image flickering and distorting, as if the mirror was losing its hold. But before it disappeared entirely, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. In the farthest corner of the garden, just beyond Freddy's reach, something moved, something alive, and it was coming closer. As the garden began to fade into an unsettling blur of shadows, Daniel's heart raced, his chest tightening with a sense of impending doom. The figure that had been moving in the distance, something far darker than Freddy, was getting closer. It was hunched, its silhouette barely visible through the thick fog that now enveloped the garden. But its presence was undeniable, like a malevolent force that should not be. Daniel tried to move, but his body felt paralyzed, as though the ground itself had gripped him. His eyes were fixed on the approaching shape, and despite the fear gnawing at him, a sense of dread far more primal rooted him to the spot. The air grew colder still, so cold it burned, and the faint rustling sound of the thing's steps echoed like a death knell. It was dragging itself, not walking, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. Freddy's eyes never left him. They were unblinking, empty. It was as if the legend of the great rock star had been swallowed by something far older, far darker. "It's not about you, Daniel," Freddy's voice said, the words reverberating as if spoken by an ancient creature rather than a man. "It never was. And in that moment, Daniel understood. This wasn't just about Freddy's ghost. The house, this garden, was a tomb, and it wasn't just Freddy who was trapped within it. There were others, countless others. Spirits, souls, memories of those who had crossed the threshold of Garden Lodge and never left. The thing in the corner was drawing closer, and as it came into the dim light, Daniel could see it more clearly now, a figure cloaked in tattered black, its face hidden by a veil of shadow. Its hands were elongated, skeletal, with nails that scraped across the ground like claws. But its eyes, there were no eyes, just empty sockets, black as pitch. The thing let out a low, gurgling growl, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, so hollow it shook the air. As it advanced, the fog began to shift, and Daniel realized with a jolt that the garden wasn't just fading, it was shifting. The ground beneath him wasn't real anymore. It was a twisted, broken version of the house, a warped, decaying reflection. The creature reached out, its clawed hand grazing Daniel's leg. The touch was icy, burning cold, sending a wave of numbness through his body. He could feel it draining his very life force, and yet he was unable to scream, unable to move. "I couldn't protect them," Freddy's voice whispered, his figure still standing motionless, watching. "I couldn't save them. Now you'll see why I stayed, why I can never leave." The air around Daniel thickened, and his head spun as the world around him collapsed into chaos. The room, the mirror, the garden, everything began to twist into horrific, distorted shapes. His surroundings were no longer recognizable. The walls of the house were closing in, bending and warping, their faces taking on the features of people he had never met but somehow recognized. Some were smiling, others weeping, eyes full of pain, despair, and longing. A sudden realization hit him like a hammer. These weren't just spirits of the past. These were memories, fragments of those who had died within these walls, cursed to relive the horrors of their final moments over and over again. And that thing, that creature in the corner, wasn't a ghost at all. It was the embodiment of something far older, something that had been feeding on the souls trapped here for decades, maybe centuries. The creature lunged at him then, its mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing teeth like broken glass, jagged and sharp. Daniel tried to move, tried to scream, but his body was frozen, as if the very air had solidified into stone. The creature's breath reeked of decay and death, its weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. And then, the mirror shattered. In an instant, Daniel was back in the room, his heart still racing, his body drenched in cold sweat. The walls of the room were normal again. The lights flickered briefly and then steadied. He was standing in front of the door, the very one he had tried to open earlier, his hand still gripping the knob. But the house felt different now. It was more alive than before. It hummed with an unnatural energy, and there was a presence, something watching him from the shadows. He dared not turn around, but he could feel it, the air shifting, growing heavier. Freddy's laugh, that haunting, playful laugh, echoed through the walls, but now it was different. It was twisted, almost mocking. "You shouldn't have gone looking for answers, Daniel." The door creaked open by itself, revealing nothing but an endless void beyond it. No garden, no hallway, no escape. And then, in the distance, through the cracks in the doorway, he heard something else, a voice, faint but unmistakable, a voice that made his blood run cold. "It's not over, Daniel." And slowly, from the darkness beyond, something began to emerge. Daniel's body tensed as he slowly turned toward the voice. The doorway was now wider, the dark void beyond it alive with shifting shadows. From the darkness, something began to emerge, a figure cloaked in the same tattered black, its hollow eyes locked onto his with an intensity that pierced his soul. Freddy's voice echoed one last time, distorted and deep. "You can't leave. You're part of it now." With a sudden surge of clarity, Daniel realized the truth. He hadn't been drawn into the house's haunting. He had been chosen. The house didn't just trap spirits, it fed on them, and it had been waiting for someone to break the cycle. Waiting for him. As the figure lunged, Daniel's scream was swallowed by the darkness, and the door slammed shut. The house was silent once more. The next morning, the staff arrived at Garden Lodge to find everything as it should be, immaculate, serene. The piano, untouched, sat in the music room, but on the floor beside it was a single red rose, slowly wilting at the edges, and the faintest echo of a laugh could still be heard, drifting through the halls, forevermore. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.